I mix what I like organic, vegan, soul food from your media diet. Live healthy. I mix what I like,
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
Hey, what's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like, right here live on Black Liberation Media. Greetings, everyone. Peace, peace, peace. Please like, share, subscribe. Support the Patreon on your way in. Swing over to blackliberationmedia.org and pick yourself, do yourself a favor, get you some summer swag, get you some, and support the collective and the cooperative. Look at this. Mama's Biscuits Legends in the building, bright and early. Let them know. P stands for percussion. Parrish, always good to see and hear from you, my man. Hope all is at least relatively well. And let them know the greatest funk band in the history of Western Maryland from 1997, 1999. Yes. Other than that, everybody, welcome, greetings. Come on in, and looking forward to a fine discussion with Professor Akinyele Umoja this morning. And then, of course, we're coming back at 12 o'clock. Renee in the building for a special Saturdays with Renee on a Monday. As we I almost forgot. Yeah, this is Memorial Day. So this is the Memorial Day special extended, and then if I'm not mistaken, Root Work will be on at 4 o'clock. So you got a full day here at Black Liberation Media. So go ahead and fire up the grill or whatever you however you want to you want to do it, and get yourself comfortable. And right on 4 o'clock. So yeah, you get a special Saturdays on a Monday. You know what I mean? So definitely be back and for that. Other than that, okay, our guest is here, so I'm very excited to have this conversation, and a long overdue return of sorts of our next guest, at least to my show. Long overdue, and someone who will be featured at this forthcoming National Black Radical Organizing Conference taking place in Indianapolis. Some of it will at least be live streamed here at Black Liberation Media. So make sure you have your bell rung and aren't, and are ready to, if you aren't going to be there live, to check it out virtually. And of course, I am talking specifically about Professor Akinyele Umoja, who, among many other things, is a professor of African American Studies at Georgia State University, legend in Black radical political organizing, National Council for Black Studies, and author, of course, of We Will Shoot Back, Armed Resistance and Mississippi Freedom Movement, and is the editor of this fantastic new memoir about Robert and Mabel Williams. So, Professor Umoja, welcome. Good to see you again. Hope all is relatively well.
Yes, sir, brother. Good morning, Jerry.
Good to see you as always. And let me just say congratulations. I have been hearing about this book for what feels like a long time, probably longer for you.
Yes.
But it's been well worth the wait. I got the book, the Kindle, I got the audio. I was listening to it this morning. I mean, there's so much to get to. So
the audio version is out already?
No, so I misspoke. What I did was I put the Kindle in my speech app.
Gotcha.
So I could listen to it that way.
Okay.
Which was somewhat helpful, except that I'm always wanting to run back and make notes and highlight. So it's kind of clunky for me to do it that way. But I was just trying to devour as much as I could before today. And hopefully this will just be the first of several conversations about this and other things, because there's a lot in here. There's so much. And then obviously a lot that isn't there that could also be brought up. So, but let me just invite you to say a few words about the project. I do have a few questions. We can obviously take some time with the chat, and then let me know if you have any particular time constraints. I don't think I cleared that before we got started.
No, I'm
And
good. Good.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I'm good in terms of time, man.
Okay.
This is a blessing that it's out. Like you said, it took a while. The project started for me. Well, it even started before I was committed to it. I'd only met Robert Williams one time. It was in the 70s. I came down here to Atlanta. I was a member of the African People's Party. I know you had Hiram and Brother Orasami on last week, and they talked about Muhammad Ahmed, also known as Max Stanford. I was in an organization with him, came down here to visit him. And it was a U.S.-China Friendship Association. And Rob spoke at that. And I got to hear him speak and met him, shook his hand. I also met the great Harry Haywood that day. And
wow.
Yeah, it was a historic day for me in terms of my personal life. Then after he passes, I meet Mabel and their son, John Williams, in 1997. I just started at Georgia State. And the widow of Harry Haywood, Gwendolyn Hall, invited me to come speak at a symposium at University of New Orleans. And it was dedicated to Robert Williams. Robert Williams had passed a year prior. And so I met Mabel. We invited her to Georgia State. And, every time she would come to Atlanta after that, she would give me a call. And so I'm trying to remember the year now, but it was before We Will Shoot Back came out. Mabel contacted me and asked if I could edit Robert's memoir at that time, which was called While God Lay Sleeping. And I'll talk to in a second about where that title comes from. And so I was working on We Will Shoot Back, and I told her, that was first. I had to get it off my plate. And so then when I got back with her, she said she and her son John were working on it and not to worry. Then Max would contact me, and he was saying that Mabel was, sick with cancer, and so I didn't want to bother them then. I had the time, but that was the priority, just checking on them during that time. After she passed in 2014, John would contact me. He would contact the great John Bracy, who I know you're familiar with, one of my role models as a historian, former member of the Revolutionary Action Movement himself. And he asked us to carry on the project. At that time, we didn't know that John only had I forgot how many months, maybe 6 more months to live. And he hadn't actually handed us the manuscript. And once we found out about him being in hospital, I waited a little while, and I talked to his widow, Lisa Williams, and she invited me to come to Detroit, and she gave me the manuscript. John and I began to work on it. We got to a certain point, and John knew the Williams better than I did. And at a certain point, he said, Mabel's voice is needed here. He said, this will be incomplete without Mabel's voice. And at that point, I was damn near finished with I was finished doing the editing of Roberts. And I was like, man, can we just get this out? And he was saying, no, he insisted. He's the elder, and he really pressed. And so we insisted on getting Mabel's. We at that point, because we wanted her voice, we included with the assistant Elisa again, Gloria Neb House. For those you don't know her, she was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, worked with Kwame Ture in Lowndes County, was a member of the Provisional Governor of the Republic of New Africa, as a scholar, activist, was a professor at University of Michigan, Dearborn. So she was seriously qualified to do this. She joined, but then when we got Mabel's manuscript, it wasn't complete. And so we sought interviews with her so we would have her voice in the piece. And so we're very proud of being able to do it, you know, get it out. It was before COVID. And I must say, John Williams gave us a charge. Again, we talking to him around 2017, I believe. I can check the dates. This is only the second interview I've done on this. Okay, but it was after Mike Brown. I mean, not immediately after Mike Brown, but John was looking at the upsurge of, you know, what we now call the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, the upsurges that it beginning to have. And this is, again, prior to George Floyd, though. And he's saying that he wanted, his charge to us is, and it wasn't just a book, but he wanted his parents' legacy, their lessons, to be transmitted to a new generation, that they needed to know, particularly that armed resistance was a legitimate form of fighting against our oppressors. That was number one, that he wanted transmitted to, or shared with these coming generations of freedom fighters, that they should know that this is a legitimate form. Now, I'm sure he also meant their perspective on the international struggle. He also meant their way of, as we're doing now, using messaging, because Robert Williams, a more important part of his legacy is Radio Free Dixie, is the crusader, is his desire to be a journalist. Okay, so that's an important part of the legacy of the Williams family. You know, and I was always inspired by Robert Williams, so it's important for me to kind of even dig in deeper in terms of Robert Williams' legacy, the legacy of the family. I should say the legacy of Robert and Mabel, because again, in terms of anything Robert did that got him national and international significance, Mabel was involved. And that includes, you know, solidarity with Cuba. It includes, you know, being engaged to protest the Vietnam War, and to you know, speak to our people about it, as well as, you know, people around the world. And so you know, that's a brief overview of how I got involved in the program, the project, and other scholars. Because again, this is for those you know John Bracey, this will be his last project. You know, he passed. So his last project. And so, you know, when I think about particularly both John Williams and John Bracey in particular, as I do this work, and, you know, I'm a spiritual person. So, you know, I kind of take that ancestral legacy to be important, as well as, you know, the legacies of Robert and Mabel.
Well, let's take that point to go back to something you mentioned that I definitely was interested in. There's so much that well, I'll just speak for myself, that as I read this, so much that I just was ignorant to, or just insufficiently aware of, or just realizing I just didn't really pay much attention. First of all, let me back up even one quick second. Thank you for that. Rest in power to Professor Bracey, a legendary, you know, figure, unheralded, insufficiently heralded, I should say. And unfortunately, I only got to meet him a couple times, and once by accident on our way to the Africana Center. Salute to Dr. Turner, to go pay tribute to him in that center. And we ran into each other waiting at the airport. And I don't know what I expected, because I had never really built with him like that. And we just hung out for a little while, and he was like the coolest dude ever. Like, yeah. It was just like, it was like this
storyteller and jokester.
Absolutely. Very funny, I mean, he was, and but obviously brilliant. and on point politically. So yeah. But yeah, so one of the things that and this is probably a bias of mine, admittedly, but that is often associated with variations of materialists is this question about religion and spirituality. And I've never thought about and don't remember reading or focusing on Rob or either of the Williamses talking much about that. So when I saw that the title of his memoir was or his portion, I should say, um, while God lay sleeping, I thought that's I don't know. Let me figure out what that. So yeah. Where does that come from? What is the
It
meaning
comes
there?
from this, his mother was very deeply religious, and excuse me, right now I'm forgetting the name of his mother, and she's deeply spiritual. He's born in Monroe, North Carolina, but his uncle, his favorite uncle, I believe Charlie, was an atheist. Okay, and they used to debate, and Charlie would come by the house, and of course he'd have some, might have some liquor he'd been drinking, and then he might have been friendly with the ladies, and so she would always get on, "You going to hell," and so he's looking at that particular time. This is the 40s, right? And he, black, we just had what historians call the nadir period. I feel is still going at that point, which is low period because of lynching of black people, Jim Crow, disenfranchisement, all that's going on. And he's like, well, God must be late sleeping because God ain't dead. He done allowed all this ish to go on, so so that's where the title comes from. Him remembering this debate between his mother and his uncle about where the situation of the world, because keep in mind we're not just talking about segregation, Jim Crow, all this stuff happening, apartheid in the United States, but we're talking about colonialism around the world, right? So he's looking at the situation of the world and what's going on. That's not said, but I'm just throwing that interpretation in as a black man, doing my ancestral memory myself. But so he's looking at all that, and why are things so effed up? If God is looking out for it, if God's going to intervene, then that's where Uncle Charlie is coming from. Rob, I think himself did have some spiritual. It's more clear in Mabel's piece. Mabel was clearly a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
The family says Rob was also, from what they tell me. It's not apparent in his writings. And I know at different points, I know one point he joins a Unitarian church. And I think, again, that's because of social action. I think Rob's going to join the church, is going to do something for our people. You know what I mean? He ain't
He was a
concerned.
Nat Turner Christian, my
Yeah,
favorite kind.
exactly. He ain't just going to church to pray. You doing something for our people. He want to be down with you. That's where I think Rob is coming from. And so that's kind of his perspective on spirituality. He never joined a communist or left organization. He did work with, and I know an earlier piece I wrote, Gwendolyn Hall, who was in the Communist Party. I said, he worked somewhat, or excuse me, there was solidarity with Rob from the Socialist Workers Party and the Workers' World Party. And I remember Gwen Hall, because of the conflict between the Communist Party and those organizations that were considered Trotskyists, she was saying he didn't work with them Trots, but there's strong evidence, and I was key to that by Max Stanford, of their solidarity with not only Rob and Mabel, but the Monroe movement, and even later, there are folks who were charged with being involved with Rob when the incident that made Robert and Mabel having to go into exile. Of course, the great Mae Mallory, brother Richard Crowder, Yusef Crowder, who lives in Atlanta now. Um, Man, other two names are escaping me right now, but those folks were charged, and there was a strong movement to kind of defend them that both those organizations were involved in. And Rob, and I'm probably going a little bit further, he would he, even though he didn't join a communist party, a Marxist Leninist formation, he kind of distinguished. He was some communists he called bourgeois communists, uh, because he didn't see them supporting armed struggle, didn't see them supporting Black revolution inside the United States or in some other places. Then he saw some people as revolutionary communists. And as I mentioned in a previous interview, of course, he met Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. he met Mao Zedong, he met Ho Chi Minh. So there were some people that he had respect for and what they were doing in the world during a particular time. So he distinguished folks on that basis. I don't think it was the religious aspect that made him not join particular organizations. It was that. And of course, he was foundational. Again, I know I listened to the interview with Hiram and Orasami last week on Malcolm, and they talked about Revolutionary Action Movement. The Revolutionary Action Movement actually becomes a national organization because of Robert Williams. Uh, all of those people, when we talk about, General Baker and the folk out of Detroit, if we talk about the some of my elders, the people who started the Soul Book Journal in California, Northern California, if we talk about people coming out of New York, which would be Larry Neal and Askil Toure and all of them, and of course Muhammad Ahmed, they were all supporters of Robert Williams. Some of them would meet in Cuba in 1964 with Robert and Mabel. That's why they're down there, and that's when it becomes a national organization. And Robert Williams was their international chairman. So he was very intimately involved in that. They took a lot of direction from him during that time. He mentions Ram in the piece, but not explicitly. That's something else I just want to bring to the table.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking. First of all, I haven't done this right. We should have started, and I'll ask you to do that now. But in just a quick second, after I invite people to like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, put this in your socials, invite others to join you, and well, one thing is, I did want to quickly shout out also the Freedom Archives, who I know were a big part, Claude Marks and crew in putting this together, and for that audio book that they had done some years ago, that I still rely. I mean, I listened to it with my kids in the car. I mean, that thing is it was essential. And then I did get to meet Mabel once. When she was doing a kind of a press tour around a PBS documentary, and she was in DC, and we got to do an interview, which was an honor, and that was great. But so I wanted to use that to sort of turn around for a quick second, if we could, just where I should have started, or invited you to say something sooner, to just talk about who Robert and Mabel Williams were and are. If you could, if in when you give a summary, or if you were giving an introduction and an introductory statement or two in a class maybe or something, how do you briefly introduce people to Mabel and Robert Williams?
Well, Robert and Mabel, Robert Williams was a brother, Black man, as we know, born in 1925, right? He's another one of those centennial people right now, centennial freedom fighters that we're saluting. Of course, he's born in a southern town, Monroe, North Carolina, which is a Klan hotbed. Keep that in mind. This is it's not, even though the Klan were all over the South, it wasn't Atlanta. You know what I mean? It wasn't certain places I talk about when we will shoot back in Mississippi where you got black majority places. It's in Monroe, North Carolina. Uh, and so he grows up in that community. There's limited opportunities in the context of colonialism, as much as you could have in a colonialism. It's limited opportunities for black people at that time. He eventually joins the army, thinking there'd be opportunities post coming out the army. He later joined the Marines. He went to a historically black college. Robert Williams always wanted to be a writer. That's what motivated him. When he went to West Virginia State, motivated by Paul Rope, the great Paul Robeson, anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, freedom fighter, artist, but motivated by him. But Rob wanted to write in that way. Been to Detroit, was during the time of the rebellion in Detroit in the 1940s. And but after all that, would come back to Monroe. Okay. And by this point, he's a married man. He married Mabel Williams, who was a basketball player in high school. You know, a marriage Rob very young, you know, and so they come back to Monroe. He joins the NAACP. When he joins the NAACP during that time, the Klan just always come into the black community and disrupt things. They intimidate black people, which was a tradition throughout the South. Look at it in Jonesboro, Louisiana, where the Deacons Defense were formed and later on. But they would intimidate black people during the weekend. A lot of these Klansmen would be drunk, whatever, and their entertainment would be making black men dance or sexually harassing black women. And so Rob put a stop to it. This had happened earlier with the Lumbee Indians in that particular area, but he would organize black men from going to the pool hall. Generally we think of the NAACP, we think of people who are black professionals, people of that nature. But he went into pool halls, the barbershops, and organized working class black people, working class black men and women to form a century that they call the Guard. Okay, and they stopped the Klan from parading through the black community and things of that nature. It got some attention in the black press during that time. But Rob and Mabel would also, besides forming this Black Guard and defending the black community, there was a case of these two black male children who had been kissed by a white girl, 12 and 13 years old, and they were accused of sexual assault. They were going to be put into juvenile detention until they were 21. Rob made that an international issue. Again, the national NAACP didn't provide him any support, but he connected with a socialist attorney, Conrad Lynn, and they worked together to make this international case. And this, again, during the time of the Cold War. So this case was an embarrassment to the United States that two black male children were being accused of sexual assault and kept into incarceration for their entire childhood, their entire period of being minors. But then the biggest thing that catapulted Robert Williams into national headlines was when two black women in Monroe had been, again, sexually assaulted by white men. Their families wanted to retaliate physically, and Robert Williams said, no, calm down. We got the courts. We got the NAACP support. We're going to take this to court. And both white men I believe one was convicted and was only given a minor fine. and the family look at Rob crazy, like we went to court because you said so. And so he says to the press, this shows that we need to meet violence with violence. The National NAACP, which is more conservative, suspended Robert Williams for making that statement, but he had street credibility for saying that. They have a hearing in Harlem, in New York, and Robert Williams, whereas the NAACP maintained their suspension, people in Harlem rallied for him. And of course, Rob, Mabel, and one of their neighbors, Ethel Azalea Johnson, who would become Muhammad Ahmad's mentor, they formed this newsletter called The Crusader in 1959. And that network of The Crusader was went around the United States and internationally, but primarily I want to point out that there was a network that was formed where people would sell and spread this Crusader to promote the whole concept of armed resistance. So in New York, you would have people who would distribute the Crusader, like Queen Mother Moore, John Henry Clark, the great author John Oliver Killens, Malcolm X. And of course, Malcolm X would invite Rob to New York to speak at the mosque. He'd speak at the mosque in New York, and not only speak at the mosque, but they would raise money for guns, ammunition, things of that nature to go to Monroe. John Henry Clark and John Oliver Killens would actually drive to Monroe with supplies and guns and weapons. People in Detroit, I know I heard you mention on the show, Grace, Lee Boggs, and James Boggs were part of that Crusader network. And so you had not only, and I mentioned people out of the Black radical tradition, of course, in the Bay Area, Southern California, places like that. But then you had white folks. I mentioned internationally that that there was a Crusader network, and you had folks even in Canada supporting Rob and Mabel. You had white folks and white people in parts of the white left, because, as I mentioned, one thing that comes in the book, that there are elements in the left, the Communist Party in particular, who were kind of critical of Rob, armed resistance, and as they were of Malcolm X at that particular time. So it wasn't unanimity. There was some white nationalism going on there as well. So, but I shouldn't have
I'm
said
sorry
that.
So wait a minute. I have never heard one thing you said that I've never heard before, ever, which is a little bit embarrassing, is that Dr. Clark was delivering weapons and supplies to Monroe, North Carolina with John Oliver Killens.
Right.
I'm supposed to have done my master's thesis on Clark and never heard that little gem. Never came across that. I'll
provide you the citations after this. They ain't up here.
No. I mean,
some few facts leave me every now and then, but I definitely have them.
I'm sure you do. I'm not disputing it.
Because young folks say I got the receipts.
No, I'm sure you do. I'm not disputing that. I'm disputing my own methodology, clearly, to have missed that. Something is wrong.
It's funny how we leave, certain facts about certain people are left out. Even like, but sometime after they're gone, you could tell them that wasn't secret, because I found it in a book. But
no, I'm mad that I that's even worse. I wish you would have heard that secret, because I thought that I had found everything. So or heard everything.
What we could get.
There's always, right? Of course, and because but to your point, that should have been a highlight. No doubt. I just wish somebody would have highlighted that sooner, though. That's all I'm saying. Like, where was that? That's a story.
They weren't looking for that. You know what I mean? They weren't looking for it. That's what I guess part of my career is based on that. Anyway, just to go on further with them, of course,
Yeah, please.
the major incident that happens that makes Rob an exile. Well, let me point out even before that, Rob, prior to going to Cuba, had been to Cuba twice, maybe 3 times. I had that off. He was part of the founding group of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in 1960. So after the Cuban Revolution, Robert Williams decides, along with Clark, as I mentioned, John Henry Clark, along with Amiri Baraka, Leroy Jones at that time, along with John Oliver Killings, who I mentioned earlier, they're some of the Black folks who early on said they want to be in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. Rob, even at some point, and this ain't in the book, but he puts a Cuban flag in front of his house. You know,
On whose house?
In front of his house, his own house.
Oh,
He raises a Cuban flag to show his solidarity with Fidel. He has that much respect for Fidel. This ain't in the book either, but if you see the book, there's a picture of Rob and Mabel with guns. And I was told, so I don't have this it's not in the book. He didn't say it, but I was told that Fidel actually gave him that. But I don't have corroboration for that.
The picture that came from Fidel, you're saying?
The picture was taken by his brother, John. It's John Williams. I forgot his middle name. His son's John Chalmers Williams. But the gun actually was given to him by Fidel. That's what I was told. Word. But I don't have corroborating evidence for that. But the picture was actually taken by Rob's older brother, who's actually, just a side note, for those who are interested, he was big in the Qs, in the Mega Sci-Fi, whatever it's called. Okay, for those
always important. These things are always important.
I'm not a Greek, and I'm not dissing them either, because those are some of the people we need to be organizing as well. But
yeah,
but anyway, so she's always in solidarity with Cuba, and you want to keep that in mind. He's an internationalist, even before going to Cuba or China. He's thinking globally. Prior to that, he wrote an article, I think in the 50s, that was in the Militant, the Socialist Workers Party newspaper. So he's thinking different things. Like I said, he had studied the great and was inspired by the great Paul Robeson. So, Robert Williams ain't just your traditional Negro thinker, at that particular time. He's not confined by certain type of limits in terms of where he's coming from. But what happens is they have the nonviolent movement is really kind of concerned that you got this example, Monroe, that comes up, that some people are saying, well, armed resistance will work. So they want to test it. And they send nonviolent activists committed to nonviolence to Monroe to do some demonstrations there. Rob is cool with that. And he's saying in some places, nonviolence might work, and we'll try it. He even participated in some pickets himself. Okay, but when that happens, the Klan even intensifies its racism. Klan, and I should just say some other white civilians, because everybody wasn't Klansmen, but everybody had that settler colonial mentality. A lot of them, I won't say everybody, but
I mean, one of the points that is made in the book, though, is that Robert Williams is talking about a point similar to what you're making here, where he's saying something to the effect that Christians, Jews, other variations of Europeans all coalesce into some form of white nationalism at the end. Like at the end of the day, that's where that's sort of their default, which leads, interestingly, to what so far for me has been one of the more fascinating parts of the book, which is his conflict with elements of the Cuban Revolution. Panera, was that his name? The dude's name? I forgot exactly his name, but the one he ends up having this discussion with, who tells Robert, well, because you're not a Marxist Leninist, you don't understand you don't understand the dynamics of even your own country, where Robert is saying there's not going to be this worker solidarity thing because the white worker is not built for that. And the Cuban dude is saying, you're wrong. Like, you can't do some black thing. And it's fascinating. And yeah, anyway,
particularly consider where we're at today.
Exactly.
Yeah, consider where we're at today, which I think even when John gave us the book, I don't think he could anticipate some of the things we're seeing right now, but maybe he did. But yeah, so they try to test it. There's a big explosion. The black community, of course, is on a state of alert. And lo and behold, you got this white couple who attempts to drive through the black community. I wish I had a map up to show how the hell you gonna drive through this black community. They from there. Ain't like they was visiting from Georgia some damn
That's
where.
a really good point. Why would what did they
what were they even through the black community? And folks who weren't a part of the Robert Williams discipline paramilitary organization snatch them up. They plead to be taken to Rob, and then they asked Rob to escort them out of the black community. And he's like, since then, a setup. You know, he wasn't like Ramaphosa last week at the White House.
Oh, wow.
he senses a setup, and he says, look, you can stay here overnight, but I'm not taking you nowhere. And the next morning, he's charged with kidnapping. He's called and told he'll be lynched. The state troopers are coming and they're going to lynch him. So Robert's thing, him and the family need to leave for a little while. He thinks it's going to be over. It's probably like us with COVID a few years ago. We thought a few weeks at home, right? So he leaves, he heads to New York, and then he finds out about this national manhunt for him. So the family leaves and they go to separate places in Canada. Again, he has a network in Canada. They're in Canada, and Rob is thinking he's cool there. But then they hear that the Canadian Royal Mounties, which is like their FBI, their state, whatever, federal police are looking for him. At that time, me growing up, we used to always hear that the Canadian Royal Mounties always get their man. That was a popular saying during that time. And he was saying, he needed to get out. And he was like, man, wouldn't it be great if a black man's the first one to get away from the Canadian Royal Mounties? And wouldn't it be even better if that black man's me? So but it's arrangements made. He also here, because the people also, he's housing them, providing refuge, are part of the Cuban Solidarity Network. They said that Fidel had said if Robert Williams or his family show up at any Cuban embassy, then take care of them. It just so happens that they set up where Rob is told to go to the airport, and there's a flight coming from Havana. He's told to go in the bathroom, and someone said, Williams, are you Williams? And, there's a woman out there. The sister, a black woman's waiting for him there to get on the plane together. It just so happens, if those of you familiar with the Cuban Revolution, the woman, and I couldn't find her name, I searched for it high and low, but she was the wife of Juan Almeida, who was a black man who was involved in the Cuban Revolution, who was one of Fidel's closest comrades. So you got to think this is the highest level of the Cuban Revolution that helped coordinate getting this black man from Canada to Cuba. So that's how important their solidarity was with Robert at that time. He goes from the United States, and the quick version, he goes from the United States to Cuba during 1960. While in Cuba, Cuban workers help him produce The Crusader from Cuba. They also, he's provided support from the Cuban Revolution to broadcast a radio show, Radio Free Dixie, into the United States. Also, while in Cuba in 1963, you have the bombing of the church in Birmingham, and Rob, again thinking globally, reaches out to global leaders to get them to condemn this in the United States. Rob, the leader that spoke out on it was Mao Zedong, and right after he invites the William tour China. Eventually, the sons would go to China for education, and eventually the Williams, because of contradictions, as you mentioned earlier, within the Cuban Communist Party. He always he never condemned the Cuban Revolution, but he had conflicts with some elements who were, he felt from his analysis, were influenced by the U.S. Communist Party that was at that point, particularly after Rob embraced RAM and later on would embrace the Republic of New Africa. They were opposed to those elements. They were opposed to his position around armed resistance. And he thought it would be better and he'd be less confined in China at that particular time. In China, he would be in support of, opposed to the Vietnam War, would visit and speak at rallies in North Vietnam during that time. And eventually, Rob would spend, I used to think before I did this research, I thought he was a resident in Tanzania, but he was a tourist, basically. He wanted to actually leave and be in exile in an African country, but there were not an African nation state that felt secure enough for him to be there at that time. With their, they weren't ready for that smoke with U.S. imperialism. So he was able to visit
deep.
there. Yeah, that was deep for me and a little bit hurtful, but it is what it is. But one of the things, though, that again, Rob, one of the things I didn't know till I began to research is, again, he only intended to be gone for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. He wanted, and I don't think he's alone in this. Most, my sister, comrade, Nahanda Biadoon, I know that she wanted at some point to come back to the United States. Asada Shakur, when you see her on visits, she wanted, she missed her family, she missed her comrades, she missed hearing certain music, eating certain foods. That's where they grew up.
Can I just interrupt? I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but I just wanted to just a quick shout out to Sister Nahanda. I only met her once, and she turned out to have had a real good relationship with a homeboy of mine who did medical school down there, and she's also she inadvertently is responsible for one of my closest friendships to this day. Because when I met her briefly, I got sent on what I thought, I was like, I was all excited. I thought I was sent on a mission. She said, deliver this envelope to so-and-so when you get home.
It wasn't to me, matter of fact.
No, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. It was a friend of mine who at the time taught at the University of Maryland and ended up introducing me to Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs.
She did her work down there. She was like the godmother for the.
I just want to say, for the record, though, I did not open the envelope, and to this day, I do not know what it was in it. So I just did my duty faithfully. And salute. So rest about. But I'm sorry. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that. Yeah,
a minute on her is she was exile, a self-described New African freedom fighter. While she was in Cuba, for medical students, Black medical students who were down there, they didn't have an embassy like people coming from Angola, Guinea-Bissau,
right,
or other African countries. Her home was their embassy. So, they would come there to eat. They would come there for Kwanzaa. They would come there, just to get political education. So she developed those relationships with those students. And she's also known as a mother of Cuban hip hop. because she helped mentor a lot of the artists there, and particularly with her relations. And of course, you've had people like Manifa Bandeli and Lumumba Bandeli who did Black August hip hop.
Black
So
August, yeah.
they made that connection down there with Nahanda. But woo, now I'm way off kilter. But so
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
no. My sister Nahanda, we got to salute her. Uh, our a lot of our international work we do, and I'm a member of Malcolm X grassroots movement, is in her name. But to go back, so Rob at some point makes a decision, and with the support of Milton Henry, also the great attorney, also known as Guy Edie Obadeli, one of the founders of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, and also a friend of Malcolm X. But he would help engineer Rob's return to the United States in Detroit. And interestingly enough, it was they get him back after he was held in detention in England on his way back. But he comes back to Detroit, and they were able to fight extradition for years, and eventually goes back to North Carolina, is exonerated, and the family's reunited in the United States. Interesting with that piece is that, wow, there were elements of course, the United States government who wanted to put Rob under the jail, right? But then there are other elements who saying this at that point they had no relations with China. China it was about a fourth of the world's population. They
Something.
they
Yeah.
looking at that as that's a market. That's a big market. We ain't in touch with, and they some wanted relationships with China, and so it was like the reason I think he wasn't snatched up in that faction who wanted to incarcerate him weren't able to get him is they wanted what was in his head. He met not only was he in China, he met Mao, he met Zhou Enlai, he knew all the you know what I mean. So he ended up for a while teaching at the University of Michigan in Chinese studies. And so I think that's one of the things that kept him from being another one of our political prisoners during that time. He eventually was able to go, and he was exonerated of the charges in North Carolina. He lived the rest of his life in Baldwin, Michigan, northern Michigan. He was engaged in some human rights activism there, but kind of lived more of a quiet existence. I know, I'll probably jump ahead a little bit. I know eventually he would resign because he was made the president of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, but he would resign that post after a period of time, a short period of time in the United States. I could say, if you want me, I could say more on that and other stuff. I think he
No, I
was.
do. There's a lot more, but if, with your permission and everyone's and forgiveness, I'm going to ask that if we could take a quick break, uh, um, just a quick, old man break, and
I'm older than you, so I'm down.
yeah, well, you know, but to do that, I thought we could take a little look and listen to Robert himself, and a little bit from the classic Negroes with Guns documentary, which I'll put in the show description so people can see it in its entirety if they haven't already. And I'll also eventually put the link to the Freedom Archives audio book as well. And Baba Akinyele's link is already there. But when we come back from this quick break, we can absolutely talk much more about really as much as you would want. And then I still have a couple questions, and we can also get into the chat as well. So folks will just bear with us for a quick second. We'll be right.
Let me see.
Let's see. Forgive me, everybody. Give me a quick second. I don't know why I'm All right, everybody. My apologies. I welcome back and all of those good things. I just don't understand why all of a sudden I can't share anything on here without crashing everything. So I'll have to work on figuring that out. But please, everybody, as we regather here for this discussion of the memoirs of Robert and Mabel Williams, featuring Dr. Akinyele Omowale Umoja, please do like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, ring the bell, make sure you've, if you can, support the Patreon. Yeah, the birds do their thing in the morning. Thank you very much. And uh yeah, and as I said, I'll still put the links to everything in the show description that I was just talking about, so that folks can review and listen to and watch Robert and Mabel and many others talk about some of these histories. And but let me bring Baba Akinyele back up on here, and welcome back. And then yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have you talk about anything from the book or the history that you would like to revisit. Um, Sort of as a prompt, I do want to come back to that point about where, you know, how Robert and Mabel formed their politics, um, and this question of where. First of all, there were a couple of interesting things. First of all, Robert and Mabel apparently decided that they would not allow for us to learn about how to build and maintain revolutionary relationships.
Yes.
If there was any disappointment, I admit a little bit of a disappointment in that. I would have been interested to read about or hear more about how do you maintain relationships in these struggles. I think they could have been, you know, that was you know, one. But I was fascinated, and I would have only wanted to hear more about this formulation of the politics that, as you talked a little bit about, to read about this conflict with the Marxist Leninism in Cuba and the white communists, and to whatever extent, I don't know to what extent it changed towards the end of his life, but his basic idea that there has to be this Black solidarity or initial Black national struggle that could not expect solidarity from, as I said earlier, those he saw consistently reforming their white nationalist tendencies. And he makes a point that I would like to follow up on, and just in my own research more, because he that I think actually is applied to Black people to this day, today. When he talked about one of the reasons why he couldn't expect white solidarity is that the white worker here, he said, had too much access to consumer goods. And as long as they could buy things and go shopping, they were not going to be interested in being in real solidarity with the working people, certainly Black and brown people in the world majority, the rest of the diaspora. And I think a version of that is applied to Black people today, that you know, like, as long as you have hope of buying some things, you know.
Which
So
we
anyway,
call drinking the Kool-Aid.
yeah.
but no, to the first point, I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think they're of a generation where, because I would like to know more about that. I know a lot of the readers would too. How do you maintain your marriage in the spite of going underground, living in exile, all that? How do you maintain that? You know, like well, a lot less. A lot of us are struggling here in the United States today, right? But I
Facts.
think they're from a generation where you didn't talk about a lot of what was going on with your personal life as we are today. You know, now, particularly social media, people stuff all on blast. You know, so you didn't
Sharing
talk about
too
it.
much.
I know, like, bro, we don't need to know that. TMI, you know. But so I think that that's going on. But I think it's also, again, like I mentioned, Juan Almeida. I couldn't even find. I did a search. I couldn't find his wife's name. You know, there's a lot of revolutions. A lot of, they don't tell you a lot about their significant others. I think from the standpoint that makes you vulnerable, you know, if people can get at your families. So I think there was things that they didn't share with other people based upon that. Uh, as it regards to how did they arrive at their analysis, you know, Rob is studying, he reading stuff. Like I said, he wrote in the militant in the 50s prior to even this Monroe experience. So he's reading stuff. He knows about the Cuban Revolution. He visits Cuba, you know what I mean? And he probably sees in those early days, remember that Fidel didn't declare himself a Marxist Leninist till maybe a couple of years in of the revolution. He probably sees them as sort of what Harold Cruz would later call revolutionary nationalism. Harold Cruz was on that trip to Cuba as well. And
That's
so
right.
I think that Rob, you know, being a part again of that foundation of RAM and stuff, and he begins to define himself as a revolutionary nationalist. I think they want to develop a radical Black ideology, you know, this anti-capitalist, because Rob wasn't capitalist. In fact, I got something for you. In 1969, he has a statement about Black capitalism. This is
Stop
for you,
playing.
Jared. I got that for you, Jared.
Stop playing.
I said, Jared, I love this. But he has a
I'm
statement where he talks about Black in 1969 in the Crusader. They talk about what he calls progressive Black nationalism. He talks about a critique of Black capitalism is leading us nowhere. Analysis of Black studies, because remember, Black studies is in its infancy then, as well as Rob Williams says in all of that, he's a Black separatist. Now, again, as I told someone else, that's not the terminology I would use because it makes you think when somebody says they're separatists, then I ain't dealing with white people at all. And it's clearly he got white allies and friends, right? So he's not talking about he's not going to deal with white
like
people.
reactionary in
Yeah,
some
he's saying
sort of or narrow, maybe.
and when I heard him speak in the 70s, he defined himself as a black separatist, which is why I disagree. Some people said his dealings with RAM and RNA were opportunities. He just needed some friends groups he could connect with while he was overseas. That was I can't remember if Tim Tyson says that in the book, and Tim is a friend, but he says that in his dissertation. And we had a little conversation on it. But when I heard him say that, he's speaking that Cuba-Chinese Friendship Association meeting I went to was mostly white folks. Okay, so why would a black man say to a group of white people, I'm a black separatist, if he didn't really mean it? You ain't gonna win no points for saying to a group of white people you're a black separatist. But what he meant by that was I believe that Rob, particularly what he experienced in North Carolina, and even after what he saw happening, like churches being bombed, things like that, where children being killed. He was convinced, and you could tell in his statements abroad and while he's in Cuba, that he believes the United States is on a course where there'll be, massive genocide of black people if we don't do certain things. So he's thinking we need to have, and this is why he immediately embraces RNA, that we need to have a state to protect our lives. Medgar Evers was considering the same thing in the early 60s. Given what was happening to black people in the South at that particular time, how can you not consider that we might not need to have, as some people would say, a homeland or something of that nature? We needed some sort of protection because, again, even as we see right now, the hostility against us in this place ain't going nowhere soon.
I was going to say it's still a relevant question today.
Yeah, it's a relevant question. It's the question of how that could actually happen. But
that's a different, more difficult question. But the idea is, but that's my point. Is the idea is that the idea is still relevant to consider, is really more of as I understood what you were saying, indicative or a statement about this place than it is about anything else. I mean,
right.
it's the hostility is just consistent. So yeah. But yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, we're talking.
Okay.
We have a conversation.
Yeah, so there was one bit of difficulty, in the section where he's talking, chapter 50, and which may to some sound more intimidating than it is. Not a lot of these chapters are not very long, so I don't want people to think that I've said chapter 50 that we're talking about some 7,000 page.
No, we
book.
kept them. Some of them were long, and we reshaped them. That was part of that for reading. So no, they're not very long. Not long reading.
Though a lot of them leave me wanting, it's like I would love for some of them to keep going. I mean, there's just so much. So in that chapter 50, though, he talks about reaching out to the world anti-imperialist leaders, and this was a little bit. You talked to it said when there was no African nation secure enough to bring him, that you talked about a little sadness with that. I was a little sad reading this part where he's talking about he reached out to all of these world imperialist leaders, and until finally hearing back from Mao, nobody really wanted to say anything about the black struggle here. And it was he's talking about Nkrumah, he's talking about Sukarno, he's talking about the whole Bang Dung, OAU crew, and it's like, oh man. And then finally Mao reaches out. Right. So I'm wondering now, given what we said earlier, do maybe I don't. What do you think? I don't know, what was that about? Is that, and is it connected to the point you made earlier about they weren't ready for that smoke and dealing
No,
with
no.
Williams?
Keep in mind they were early in you mentioned Nkrumah, okay, what
Mhm,
57 they get independence.
mhm.
Then it's 66 when the coup occurred
Yeah,
in Ghana.
it's
And
like 5 minutes. Yeah.
which is interesting now, one of the things I consider, because I know there were two countries or maybe three that were willing to give Malcolm asylum. So
Mm,
uh I don't know, but but a lot of these states are in their infancy.
mhm,
And so they're not from that level, taking making that statement against the United States. Clearly, they didn't feel strong enough to do it, but Mao did. You know what I mean? And so Mao was willing to take that step at that time, and he does mention in the preamble of the statement that he was reached out to by Robert Williams, and I think he says that Rob had reached out to him on earlier occasions about things, and so
mm,
Rob was lobbying. He, it's similar to when you remember when Malcolm goes to Ghana and he's telling folks, we can't celebrate here. He's talking to the black folks from the United States who are in Ghana. We can't, while our people are still suffering in the United States. So Rob didn't go there and he just said, we just going to chill. He's serving as a diplomat, which is why, I know it's said by some that Rob was a pawn in the Cold War. Now, I think Rob is working it the best he could in that situation. Rob and Mabel, I should say, they're working it the best they can in that situation to try to be supportive of the movement that's still at home, and they're being advocates and representatives for uh, the Black liberation movement in the United States at that time, and receiving recognition as such as representatives of that movement. Again, they're hosted by Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, and speak at a national, global rally. And it wasn't just as a pawn; he's advancing certain interests at that particular time. So, yeah, I think when we think realistically, again, those states are young, and so there's probably a little insecurity there. Um,
Yeah, no doubt. It's not even that they don't have a good reason or logic. It was just uncomfortable to read. That's all. It's just not. It's
yeah,
just
I mean, it's global
yeah.
politics as the domestic one. Sometimes the realities.
But to the point that you
Right.
were just making, the one of the part of that argument he's having with the Cuban revolutionary, I think they said he's mostly known as the beard or the red beard. He was, to your previous point, not, he was always trying to avoid cameras and microphones, and but part of the argument was dude was telling Robert to chill. Like, why don't you just relax while you're down here in Cuba? Like, put your feet up and enjoy yourself for a minute. And Rob was like, man, what are you talking about? I got a revolution to foment. I got to get, tell Fidel, what's up with the airwaves he promised me and all this other kind of stuff. It was like, I'm not here to chill. I'm here to make, make use of world revolution and my access to it, and for black people in the United States to be part of that struggle. So
and,
I thought that was, yeah.
and he knew what he faced in the United States, right? When he knew about the struggle. It's not. He didn't leave like he's a criminal and he's just leaving. He in a nice situation in the States. He left a struggle. Uh,
uh
knew the consequences of that, so he's going to support people. I mean, he's not going to get there and forget from his vantage point. Others
right.
might, but it wasn't his personality. It wasn't what he was about, nor was it what Mabel was about. I mean, she could have, weren't charges against her. She could have stayed.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm saying. Like, I was so curious to Yeah, I mean, obviously they have the right to keep their relationship private. I admit, I was just curious about just that kind of point. You know, she could have left. You know, she could have maybe just, you know, any number of different things could have happened, and they managed to stay together. And it was actually interesting to I did skip around a little bit and was reading sort of towards the end of the book where I believe she's asked by her grandchild about race,
Right,
and her grandchild, I think, was a product of an interracial relationship and
right,
was, you know, saying, am I black or white? And
right.
Mabel was saying, you're human. And I will say this was the I felt I was my own little personal, you know, whatever, but I, disappointment is too strong a word, but I would have liked to see more of a discussion. I just always, because I'll be honest with you, be perfectly honest, this is no disrespect. It's just that the response that she gave, which I've gotten myself, of, you know, you're human.
Right. I
I
know.
was
I
just
hear
like,
you.
I struggle with that. You know, I don't even feel comfortable saying it. I just admit I just was like, I don't know. I think what I was hoping for when I skipped to that chapter, what I'm always hoping for is some statement that encourages some analysis about how our particular mixture should or should not be used or misused in terms of Black liberation or the liberation of other people. This and the tendencies that I've felt, where some would want to say, well, you know, you're a product of these different communities, and we're all human, and you can be part of this advancing. And I've just always felt like, no, I'm the product of two antagonistic, hostile, and still violently warring communities.
And in this country, in this world, you
In
on
this,
our
yeah.
you
And that's
on our
how I
team.
feel. Right. So I don't ever want, I've never, and I even, be honest with you, you know, my mother, you know, I love her to death and all of that. You know, we even had a brief moment because she would want to use at times the biracial label. And I'd be like, God damn it, no. Like that's not, we're not doing that. We're not doing that if for no other
Oh,
reason, just to make a point.
well, there, man, there was a moment that when I was first taught at Georgia State where I had a brother in my class, and he said he was biracial in the class. You know, I'm teaching Georgia State. For those who don't know, it's not majority
Yeah.
Black. We have a significant number of people of African descent there. My classes was, you know, most 99% Black. You like a Black nation up in there. And so they were on him. And first time, you know, because in my personal family heritage on my father's side, my great grandfather was a product of a slaveholder and a Black woman.
Mm,
And
mm.
some people get on me when we call out libations. I ain't even trying to remember what his name was. He was a slave master. I said my relationship to white people is different from that students because his mama raised
Right.
him.
Yeah.
So, but I do know white folks, so I could sympathize with him saying that. On the other hand, I know there were white mothers with Black men, and they've raised their children. Look, I need to arm my child for this world,
Yeah.
and this world he lives in, and he or she lives in, and they need to be armed to face that with culture, experience, identity. And they don't need it. And since it's a war, they don't need to have any ambiguity because it's a war. You know, it's a culture war at best. So, you know, it's different, man. People should have self-determination on that. Now, but if it was me telling one of my grandchildren that if that happens, I would have a different answer than Mabel. But we had to be as editors true to
Yeah, no doubt. And it's uncomfortable because I to be honest, like it's not only that I respect Mabel and Robert
yeah,
tremendously, but I also just respect people on some level. I respect people's individual relationship to these struggles and identities, and I felt a kind of way, you know, about even my own reaction to it. And because if I mean, I get it. In that moment, she's also thinking, I'm talking to my grandchild. I'm trying to help
Right.
balance family and relationships and give this child what I don't know. I'm just projecting now. But some sympathy is what I guess I'm saying, or empathy for the situation, even if you know, I'm already answering things differently with my own children and you know, their potential relationships. So anyway, it was just so listen,
Being a
yeah,
parent or grandparent, a hard thing, bro.
I
It
keep
ain't.
saying parenting is an exercise in powerlessness, and that's been my mantra. It's a definite, you know, listen, as we sort of start to shift a little bit towards a close, I'll invite folks in the chat if they have any particular questions that they want to raise, we can get to them. But also if there's anything in particular that we didn't talk anything about that you would want to share with us about the book, about the process of the book, anything.
Man, it, I just feel, like I said early on, I just feel a tremendous amount of responsibility with this book. As I did when we would shoot back, I kind of felt
Mhm.
responsible for the people I talked to and representing them in a way they wanted to be represented, not misrepresenting them. I feel the same way with the Williams, and their son is not in this book. His voice is not here, but his is certainly, he has to be considered part of it. I just want to
Mm.
say one thing on him is he became a clergyman after he returned to the United States, but he defined himself as a Baptist Maoist. So
Wow,
yeah, he kind of
that's
took on.
fascinating.
I
Yeah.
know it is. So I would like to know more about his experience and share that. I saw an interesting interview he did about his parents and his parents' legacy and what it was like as a son growing up, as a child growing up, because he experienced Monroe as a child and was active in that. He wasn't just a kid there, he was active. He goes into exile in Cuba, was educated there, and then he goes to China and returns to the United States. So just another
Wow.
interesting perspective, I think, that, you know, might be helpful. His wife, his widow, Lisa, is still with us. I mean, Lisa, very active and conscious, and I think people should hear her as well. Or when we were organizing an Atlanta book signing, and of course, you know, we'll record it and everything, but we want Lisa involved in that process because people should hear her. As well, and you know, as representing the family legacy. Um, so yeah, so I just want to say those things. It's
Yeah,
more
yeah.
that said about both of them. Of course, a whole curriculum could be written around the Williams. One of my, and I do want to say, I first heard your name from Claude Marks, and Claude
Mm.
Marks and Freedom Archives. We would not have been able to complete Mabel's work without the interviews that she did with Claude Marks and others at Freedom Archives. So they were involved in the day I said I met with John, and John Bracey was there, but also Muhammad Ahmed was there, uh, and Claude Marks, as well as Charles Farrell at that time of the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit.
That's
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Big supporter of Rob and Mabel's legacy and trying to maintain their legacy. So Clyde was an important part of that, and they have a whole thing in Freedom Archives about promoting the memory of the Williams. So they supported the book, but they had the the CD project that you mentioned, and there's other things I think they'll be planning because they've other things they've done with the family around their archives. I mean, it's very special things. I heard you made a comment about museums the other day, but but they do have things that some of us will feel are important from their experiences in China, Cuba, photos, things.
No, that would be my point. That the Freedom Archives is like in particularly in the context of this country, is the anti-museum. That's sort of the point I'm getting at. That's the collection. That's the direction we need to be going in. And all respect to them. And in fact, I just saw a great roundtable with Claude and his comrades from the Freedom Archives with Jared Ware, Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. So I encourage people to check that out from like 2 days or 3 days ago. It was another. So one question I do have though for you, given all of your work, both as a professor and an activist and organizer, is just, you know, what you alluded to it a little bit, but what can we take from these memoirs in terms of where we are today? Yeah.
No, number one, I get this, you know, it reinforced it with me. And I think I mentioned Lisa earlier. And man, I can't remember, something happened over the last few years. It was something with some maybe white. It could have been when the folks were talking about folks, the white paramilitaries were talking about kidnapping the governor of Michigan and putting her on trial and executed. It could have been that. It could have been something else. I can't remember, because Lisa and I, through this process, we began to talk back and forth. And a lot of things I learned about the family was through her. And she said, I was like, wow, that happened. And she's like, Akinyele, come on, man. You don't know? So it's like reading this book, particularly what's going on Monroe. And then if we put that to what's happening today, you know, that 70 million people, including some Negroes, 70 million people voted for a guy who's associated with white nationalism. Clearly. I mean, it is going even more crazy since he's been elected, right? Talking about bringing some white settlers over here from South Africa while they
Can you imagine that?
Telling people of color, you know, all of this stuff is happening, you know, so it really kind of clearly shows you that I'm flipping through the book right now. I'm just, not a lot has changed. Some things have changed, but not a lot has changed. And, you know, because we're talking about a country, and, you know, one of the major things that the Republican Party promoted that Democrats bought into was, is America a racist nation? And the foundations of this thing is settler colonialism, it's genocide, it's enslavement. That's the foundation of it. You know what I mean? So you could make it pretty every now and then for whatever. A lot of times just to have us drink the Kool-Aid and the people of the world drink the Kool-Aid, you could disguise it a little, but that's the foundation. That's what the capitalism here is all about. You know what I mean? That's what it's based on. So you could try to make it pretty, but that's what it is. You know, we don't like to think that we live, the matrix is real, that we're plugged into a foundation that's keeping us oppressed. And it might look pretty. Some of us, we could, one of us could even be president of the United States. But but that's what this thing really is. You know what I mean? So to say that America's not a racist country, and you know, so Williams shows that, but again, we have clear enough examples today, you know, that this is happening. And you know, our children, our youth need to be clear on that, but everybody needs to be clear on that. That, you know, war is being waged on us. It just happens in a variety of ways. Sometimes very sophisticated, very sinister in terms of where it's happening. And then a lot of us play a significant role in making that happen, right? So when you think about the Atlanta City Council voting to have a cop city. Okay,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
that's
You know what gets me about that is living here is
that's
5 years ago. We said today is 5 years since the killing of George Floyd, right?
mm, mm.
And people were protesting a certain type of policing. $90 million contributed to continue that form of policing. And somehow, you know, we forget.
And they talking about a $300 million version up here in Baltimore.
Yeah, it's nationwide.
And
It's about the
and
empire.
and shout out to Renee, who will be joining with again at 12 o'clock, creating that national map. Uh,
Mm, mm,
that a few websites have not properly attributed to her, but as they repost it, yeah, but showing that they're basically in all 50 states, some variation of cop
right,
cities are emerging.
right.
So
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's just like the whole piece around the immigration piece, bringing in the South. It's all connected. You know, because
Mhm.
people who are really scared that of the destruction of the empire. So you know, it signifies that we're in the last stages of that. But then the question is are we organized to stop it, to change it, and to create something more humane and just for future generations? You know, so the question is on us. You know, of what we're smart enough, what we're disciplined enough, what we're conscious enough to deal with, you know, at this particular time. But I guess that's why platforms like this are set up, as long as they can exist as well.
That's yeah, as long as they
As long as they can exist.
as long as one of the things that I was taking away from it in terms of where we are today is that there is this, from my vantage point, a renewed push that feels very, counterintelligence program adjacent to get Black America to cut itself off from the international community, and to struggle exclusively on our own and with the United States. And I just think that a book like this and memoirs like this are valuable in, at minimum, complicating that question. And even as we talked about, Williams was not naive. He wasn't saying everything was perfect. It's not like the whole even decolonizing world is on one unified accord. But he was clear, and Mabel, right along with them, were clear that on some level there's got to be some international relationships, because this place is I mean, even in his, even the analysis that you were just talking about, I mean, how can a country that is still willing to vote in so openly for someone so openly white supremacist, how can that be the sole focus and location of your struggle, and the where you look for solidarity or support? So that was another, I thought, very timely and important component to this memoir. uh um even a reminder of some of the internecine struggles. I mean, he talks about the infiltration that caused him, I think, to want to leave RAM at one point, and some of those kind of things. I think all of that kind of stuff is important to revisit.
Well, there's one thing
As Yeah.
that's in footnotes that aren't in his testimony, but I thought it was good to
Mm.
put in. And one of your friends, I should give her credit, Sharice Burton.
Sharice Burton Stelly, yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
CBS, yeah.
she actually sent me, while she was doing her research, correspondence that Rob had with Richard Gibson.
Mm.
Richard Gibson, who was a journalist, who we later find out was a CIA
Mm.
agent, wasn't just an informant. He was an agent. Interestingly enough, I mentioned some of my elders worked with Soul Book. Soul Book in 1966 printed something from French leftists that Richard Gibson was CIA. Okay, so Richard Gibson, Rob knew him from the U.S.-China Friendship Association. They were both involved in that network. And so he's corresponding with Rob while Rob is overseas, and he's from the correspondence dropping lugs, criticizing people in the Revolutionary Action Movement, the Soul Book, all of that, So, Rob is getting information like, hey, you can't trust these people from people he trusts. So, but we put when he mentions Richard in his memoir, this is who Richard really is. So the readers will have some idea. So, the state, while Rob is global, is doing the best it can to make sure that this network doesn't consolidate and his influence in the network is taken away. It's not in the book, but when I met Mabel, I asked her, well, why did Rob leave RNA? And because particularly when me hearing him say he's a black separatist, that goes along with Republic of New Africa. But she said when he came back, he was able to observe, okay, this has been infiltrated. He observed, she gave me clear examples of things that happened and let him know, okay, whoa, this ain't not gonna work, at this point because of the infiltration he sees inside of the group. So he leaves out. Unfortunately enough, it might have been helpful if some of what he had learned and knew could have been, but maybe he just, the trust hadn't been there. Keep in mind, he'd been gone from 61 to 69. So he had, and it's in the book, he expresses admiration for RNA, for particularly Milton Henry and others. He expresses admiration. But from what Mabel told me when I met her, he saw, okay, this is not going to work. So I'm gonna pull back. He still, I know, like my big brother Chokwe Lumumba, he and Chokwe were communication. There's other people I know he was in communication with, but in terms of being in the movement at that time, he kind of pulled back, even though he was supportive of efforts. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of that is fascinating. I think I was confusing this book with the thesis that I was just reading from Dr. Muhammad Ahmed about RAM, where he talks a little bit about the point you just made, I think, in there about Rob feeling like this is not something funky is happening in this group,
right,
and I need to step back. But there was one funny moment I thought that actually made me laugh out loud, literally, was when it said somewhat humorously, or at least that's how it sounded on the speech thing that I was listening to it on. It was that in his debate with, I think, the Cuban revolutionary about Marxist Leninism and the white worker, or I think he says something about, the shortcomings of Marxist Leninism would have had me in work because something like that. You all were going to try to assign me to work with the Free Cuba Committee. And then he said you would have me working with Lee Harvey Oswald or something like that. Like he mentions Oswald. He's like the failure of your analysis you would have had me linked up with this Oswald character. I thought, which I thought was kind of funny. And an interesting twist in history, that the idea that they might have crossed paths working with that Free Cuba Committee.
The fair play for Cuba committee. And
fair play for Cuba, right? Yeah.
Does he also have the rap that Oswald might have distributed the Crusader or something like that?
I don't remember that part, but that's that. You know what? That's funny. That's
yeah.
Now that is funny.
I'm not sure he did it, so I don't know. I might be the wrong guy. I'm not even sure he the one who did it. Killed Kennedy.
So. Oh yeah, no. That's what. So it's funny you said that, because I thought about. It's funny. I did think I would do like a humorous opening intro with you and say that the most revealing the most shocking thing to read in this memoir is that it seems like Williams bought the Warren Commission's story. Like he seems to have accepted that. It's like, I don't know. I'm not so sure about that either at this point. Maybe who knows what a real conversation off the record between those two might have revealed.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's I'm just trying to look real quick
in the
to
chat.
see if that. No, well, I'm also looking at the book real quick to see if it says in here that Oswald did the Crusade. I'd have to. But yeah, folks, are there any questions, comments, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation from the chat?
All of that.
All of that. Please do like, share, subscribe, avail yourself of the links in the show description that are already there, and those I will add later for the Negroes with Guns documentary, both on YouTube and the audio book from the Freedom Archives. Chitty, my little fat Oswald Summer 63 residence is a law office now. That's interesting. Okay. Well, anything else that are you have you already moved on to another project that you're working on, or
speeches and writings of Chokwe Lumumba? I'm gonna try to do the best of that. I have most of it transcribed already, and we're gonna go from the point. A lot of people don't know that Chokwe graduated from Wayne State Law School and then successfully sued them for discrimination against the Black folks at Wayne
that sounds
State
about
Law
consistent.
School.
That's beautiful.
There from his Republic of New Africa pieces, his being chairman of New African People's Organization, as well as him serving as a radical legal official, his perspectives on reparations. Chokwe worked in the reparations movement, was one of the founders of NCOBRA. And Chokwe is an internationalist himself. Chokwe not only spoke about the Palestinian struggle, he made clear statements during the period of time that there was a whole hysteria against Iran during the hostage crisis in Iran during that particular time. Clear Pan-Africanist, but also spoke in Venezuela during the Bolivarian Revolution. So, Chokwe has a lot to say on the international question as well as our struggle within the United States. So, just want.
Is it going to take us all the way up to his mayoral run? Is
not only run, but I want to put his inaugural speech in there too. And so just a look at that, where his politics are. He clearly says that, his politics hadn't changed. Now he's trying different tactics and methods, but clearly where Chokwe is at that point. So that's my next project.
I can't. That's beautiful. I again had the privilege of meeting once or twice, and I did get to have a conversation with him as he was making that run. And I look forward to reading that, because I wish I had a better memory, because I remember walking away thinking that's the most compelling argument for engaging mainstream electoral politics that I think I've ever heard. So it was clear that he had not. It wasn't that he was softening at all. This was clearly a tactical approach. And at the time, I remember when we were having the conversation, I was more hostile to the idea than I am now. But I remember walking away thinking that's a sharp approach. And so I'm very glad to hear you're doing that. And Rashad, I saw Rashad G in the chat saying, you ain't tell him about this, so like with you apparently you're folks that I don't know I don't know who Rashad is. I don't know. I thought that was funny. Peace.
Tell him you need to stay in touch. I've been working on this last before COVID.
There you go.
You obviously ain't happy what I've been working.
Yeah, Renee, shout out, is asking, how do we get on the book readings tour list? I'm assuming to set up a book tour. You mentioned doing some book events, and I think Renee
Yeah.
would like to get you up to New Jersey.
Oh,
I'm assuming that's what she means. So
hit, hit me
I'll
up.
happily put you in touch. Yeah.
Yeah. AK Umoja on Instagram. And I'm easy to find on Instagram. Baba AK on Twitter. So hit me on one of those. I got to get my website back up and running. Kind of let it go dormant. I'm not great at this entrepreneurship thing, but but no. So yeah, hit me up. I'm easy to find. Jared knows how to reach me. He has my personal email address.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Gotta
think
get
that'd
up
be
there.
great.
There's been other people in the New York area. Jared, will be myself and Gloria. End of June, we'll be in the Baltimore, D.C. area. I know
Oh,
we'll be
really?
at Red Emma's in
Red Emma's.
Baltimore,
Mhm.
and then was it Pros? Some politics
Politics
pro.
and Prose in
Yeah,
DC. Oh, okay,
DC.
right on.
All right,
All
so
right.
I usually only get invited to my man to Holly's place, Sankofa, and I hope I can come back there because I always love being in Sankofa. But
Yeah. I look forward. Hopefully, I can catch at least one of those when you're up this way. That would be great. And I'm not in touch with folks at Sankofa these days, but if until very recently somebody just hit me up about something over there.
I
If
saw
we
they had some
reconnect,
stuff on Malcolm. I'm on their mailing list on there.
yeah. Oh, I'm sure they did. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'll ask this person that reached out to me and see, if see about getting your book on the radar for. You should definitely be at Sankofa, because I always
Yeah.
think politics and prose is funny. It's more of a, it's more to like the downtown spot. You know what I mean? It's so
The
that's
press set that up. I've
no, it's
never
a
been.
good spot to. You should definitely go. But the Sankofa community and it'd even be great if um uh I just went blank, but a few other spots in the area would host. But
I
I'm
think
just not in touch enough. Yeah, I'd have to.
one of those engagements, if not both, one of Robert's relatives, a nephew, I think is supposed to be there, who I don't know, but I haven't met.
Hmm.
So that would be an added treat. I didn't see what the last comment said popped up in.
Oh, it was just much respect for you, Baba, for your research, transparency, intellect, and spirituality. Free to land by any means necessary.
I say appreciate it.
Yeah. But listen, this has been a pleasure. Again, long overdue. I look forward to more builds and continue reading this great memoir that you've put together here for Robert and Mabel. And again, folks, if it wasn't made clear, it's a combined. Well, it's two memoirs in one, I guess I should say. You get. Yeah, go ahead,
I do have Mabel
please.
actually speaks a little bit more about what his relationship with Malcolm was.
Yeah, that's right. You know what? I even have a note here about that. Say something. Yeah, go ahead if you would.
Since we did Malcolm 100, as I mentioned, he visited the mosque. Not visited, he spoke at the mosque, which for somebody who worked in the Nation of Islam, kind of a big thing. And they raised money, sent money for guns and things of that nature. But also, there was conversation between Malcolm and Rob, which I didn't know about. That was kind of how Malcolm got information about what was happening in the Southern struggle. So that's one thing I didn't know. It was Clyde, the work the Freedom Archives did that uncovered that from Mabel about their relationship. So people often ask about Malcolm and King, were they ever in conversation? But we clearly know that he was in conversation with Rob. And then through whatever the connections in the Revolutionary Action Movement, it was networked there. Again, you mentioned heard you mention Grace and James Boggs in Detroit. So Robert Williams was a part of this broad network of our now ancestor revolutionaries from that time. Clear, they were revolutionaries. They wanted to see a revolution in the United States, and they saw that as a path toward black liberation. Which is why we call them revolutionary nationalists.
Right
That's what
on.
they were about.
Do have at least one more question just quickly that I had missed. Josh is asking, peace from Miami, Baba Akinyele. How much was the Soviet line influencing Cuba's position on Afro-American armed struggle? It feels like a far departure for revolutionaries like Che. That's a good question.
A great question, and I think it was. He mentions a little bit about the Soviet line. He mostly mentions influence from the Communist Party in the United States, which was Soviet line. So yeah. So and again, I'm not an expert on this, but they say that one of the reasons that Che leaves, some people say, because one of the reasons Che leaves is because of him seeing that growing influence in Cuba at that particular time, and him wanting to go to Africa and other places to continue revolutionary struggle. Keep in mind, as we discussed Malcolm X 100, I'm trying to remember who says this, but some people refer to this meeting that occurs and with Malcolm Babu, who's a revolutionary from Zanzibar in Tanzania early days, Che Guevara, but not only them, Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka, some SNCC members, where Malcolm and Che, talk about their vision for revolution. And so, and this after that is when Malcolm starts making these references in his speech. If you don't understand what's happening in Mississippi, you won't understand what's happening in Congo, and vice versa. So you got these folks during that particular time that are opposing this anti-imperialist, internationalist, revolutionary movement developing. Of course, this is scaring the hell out of the CIA and their operatives. And others mention Josh is part of the Black Man Bill, and they did these webinars, educations on Malcolm in Kenya, and they talked about the Kenyan revolutionary, I think his name Pio Pinto, who Malcolm was in a relationship, who was assassinated. But there's this growing network. As I mentioned, there was one domestically, there's one internationally developing at that time. And again, they part of the thing of counterinsurgency is to knock these guys out, to isolate them, these people, because it's men and women, but knock them out before it can get strong enough, before they could develop their roots amongst working people, right? Organized working people to become an army. And when I say army, I'm not just talking about military. I'm talking about people who are willing to challenge the system to bring about a new system, new order. The job of counterinsurgency, when you study it, is to isolate those elements, right? And to keep them from, the people, say, like, who are delivering your food during COVID, right? The people who working at McDonald's, back in when I was growing up, people working in the factories, you know what I mean? All these people who keep the system going, right? Keep it going through their labor. They want to make sure that they're not organized with these ideas, because these people are the folks without health care, people who can't afford, like many of my students, sleeping in their cars because they can't, going to college, they don't have the support that wealthy people have. You know what I mean? So they sleeping in their cars. You know, might find out that's why I ain't turning their paper. You know, they're struggling to try to make ends meet. And you think they're supposed to be the growing petty bourgeoisie, but they sleeping in their damn car. You know, so they don't want radical ideas and radical not only ideas but organization to get to these type of folks. So that's why the counterinsurgency against a Malcolm, against Che Guevara, against the brother Pinto that we talked about, you know, why it occurs. They want to keep them isolated and they want to chop them off before these movements. For the OAU, Organization of Afro-American Unity, becomes this mass movement, because Malcolm was drawing, beginning to draw crowds. He drew them before in the nation. He built the Nation of Islam. Why can't he build something else? One of the things, and people should go back and listen to, was that last Monday's show, Jared?
Yeah.
On Malcolm X, what Malcolm's thinking was and where he was trying to go with it. And so if he could build that, and again, they mentioned, I wish they could have spent a little bit more time. He goes to Selma, right? Alabama. He speaks to people down there when King's incarcerated. And those ideas did spread. That's why we have something called Black Power. Develops from that thinking of Malcolm. That's the I love the book. One of my favorite books is William Sells, From Civil Rights to Black Liberation. Okay, and William Sells, who's a revolutionary brother it lives in New York and Harlem, and he talks about how Malcolm's ideas really spread to this next generation. The Kwame Ture's. What he doesn't have this in the book, but I remember when I was working on my dissertation and book, and I looked at the SNCC archives. SNCC, right after Malcolm's assassination, or maybe it was before, they have on their agenda at one of their national meetings the ideas of Malcolm X. They're studying Malcolm X, and so when you talk about that transition to what they call Black Power, Kwame Ture and Baba Mukasa down here, others, but the whole damn organization, even others before Kwame and Malcolm, Kwame and them was looking at how they need to shift their organization to more self-determination orientation in terms of what they were doing. So that's their job, counterinsurgency, to stop these ideas from getting to they used to call it back in my when I was a young man, the dry long soul black folk, to keep not only the ideas but the organization, for them to be an organized force, so they could withdraw their labor, so they could be more resistant, so they can engage and not not buying stuff. I don't know if you could curse on this platform, so I'm trying to be careful.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Feel free.
Not buying shit at certain times, to shut things down, so we can advance things in our own interests and ultimately create a society in our own interests. So that's what their job is. Are we doing our job? That's the question. Like I said, I blame us. The system, the enemy does what they're supposed to do. They're doing what they're supposed to do, so, but, the responsibility is on us. I don't call myself a Marxist-Leninist, but I will read them on occasion. And one of the things that Lenin said is, don't blame the masses for your own backwardness. So that's my message to us who say we're revolutionaries. If we're not, people aren't conscious, it's our fault. It's our fault. If people are acting ignorant out here, if they're more concerned about the Puff Daddy trial, I watch some of that madness too. I get entertained by it.
Oh, listen, no, please. Again, this is not to be higher than, you know, high and
no.
mighty and all that.
I like
It's a good reminder though.
But
No, but the point is that we have to remind ourselves and each other that of the point that you're making, even as we get drawn into some salacious areas of media and whatnot. So absolutely. And I mean, I think the work you've been doing, and again, in and outside of the university, speaks to that. And this memoirs that you've edited are another phenomenal contribution. So thank you for that. And I look forward to the Chokwe Lumumba work and more. Yeah.
Thank you for allowing us to speak about it on this platform.
Oh man, anytime. And look forward to doing it again soon. And hopefully I get to see you when you come up this way for this book talk. And I look forward to helping you get in contact with Renee for something in Jersey and New York and all of that. So
sounds good.
Yeah, salute. And thank you very much for joining us this morning. I can't think of a better way to celebrate Memorial Day.
Yeah, I thought about that. I said, okay, when we set the date, we wasn't even thinking. My wife was saying, man, don't you know that's supposed to be a day off? But it's cool.
As Diallo used to make fun of us, you know, this is us picking cotton at night. So like, you know, we anyway, no, thank you very much, Baba Akinyele. And again, congratulations and thank you for the work and look forward to more. Take good care.
For your work. Keep up the good work.
Right on. Likewise. Peace. Likewise. Free the land. All right, hey, listen, everybody. Big again salute to Baba Akinyele Umoja. The link to his work is in the show description. I'm going to very shortly add the links to the Robert and Mabel Williams video documentary that I was going to play an excerpt from, and then to the Freedom Archives audiobook, Negroes with Guns, that everybody should have in their collection. Big salute to the chat, undefeated as always, and please come back at 12 o'clock when we're rejoined by Renee for a special Saturdays with Renee on a Monday, and featuring a discussion with who I hope will be the future governor of Maryland. And with that, peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it. Like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, hit Black Liberation Media for some new merch, and catch you next time around here at.
And what do you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, have set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like.